I didn't catch my wife cheating through messages or late nights. I caught it through how carefully she managed my expectations. We'd been together for 13 years, married for 9, 1 kid, busy lives. The kind of marriage where you stop checking in constantly because you assume the foundation is solid. We weren't unhappy, we were just tired. Or at least, that's what I believed. The first thing that changed was how she reacted to questions. Not defensively, not emotionally. Strategically, if I asked what her plans were, she'd answer with just enough detail to sound transparent, then immediately ask me something unrelated. It felt like conversation, but it wasn't connection. She started using phrases like, "I just want to be clear with you," and "I don't want misunderstandings." At the time, I thought that meant maturity. Now I realize it meant control. She began setting expectations before anything happened, telling me in advance that she might be late, that work was stressful, that she needed space to think sometimes. Every statement sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a buffer, a way to soften whatever came next. One night, she sat me down and said she wanted to talk about emotional honesty. She said she'd realized how dangerous secrets could be, and that she never wanted us to become one of those couples who drift apart without noticing. I agreed. I even thanked her for bringing it up. Then she said something I still replay in my head. "I need you to trust me even when things feel uncomfortable." At the time, I nodded. I didn't understand that she wasn't asking for trust. She was asking for pre-approval. And once I gave it, the ground under my marriage started shifting in ways I wouldn't understand until it was already too late. After that conversation, she started narrating her life in advance. If she was going to be late, she told me hours earlier. If she was in a bad mood, she framed it before I could notice. It felt considerate, almost thoughtful, but over time I realized something was missing. Spontaneity. Everything came with a disclaimer. Every absence had a reason attached before it even happened. When I asked how her day actually went, she'd smile and say, "About how I said it would," like the script mattered more than the truth. She also began mentioning a new colleague. Not often, just enough to sound natural. A joke he'd made, a project they were on together. Always harmless, always brief. If I didn't react, she'd move on. If I did, she'd reassure me that I had nothing to worry about. One evening, she said she needed to stay late to finish something urgent. She texted updates, apologies, a heart emoji at the end, like punctuation meant to soften the delay. When she came home, she was calm, focused, almost energized. I asked if everything was okay. She said, "I told you it would be a long night, remember?" That was when I felt it for the first time. The quiet pressure to accept things because I'd already been warned. As if prior notice turned discomfort into consent. Over the next weeks, the pattern sharpened. She'd tell me she needed space, then take it without checking back in. She'd frame distance as something she was doing for us. If I expressed confusion, she'd remind me that she'd been honest from the start. "You said you trusted me," she told me once gently. It didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like leverage. One night, after she fell asleep, I scrolled through old messages between us. Not to find proof, to remember what we used to sound like. The warmth, the curiosity, the way we filled silence instead of managing it. That's when it hit me. The relationship hadn't suddenly changed. It had been slowly rewritten, one reasonable explanation at a time. And I had helped her do it by believing that being informed meant being included. Once I stopped focusing on what she said and started watching what happened afterward, the picture became clearer. Her space never brought her closer to me. Every break widened the distance. Every honest warning softened something that would have hurt more if it arrived unannounced. I realized I wasn't being reassured. I was being trained to tolerate less. I started noticing how off my role was to absorb. Absorb delays. Absorb explanations. Absorb emotional leftovers. She'd come home and talk about her day in fragments, skipping the parts that mattered, then ask if I was okay in a way that felt procedural. I tested it again. One night, when she said she'd be late, I replied, "Okay." Nothing else. She didn't check in. Didn't ask how I felt. She simply stayed later. That's when I understood that my reactions weren't being considered. They were being measured. Calm meant permission. Questions meant inconvenience. Silence meant approval. The confirmation came from somewhere unexpected. A friend mentioned seeing her out with someone after work. Not accusatory. Casual. I didn't know she was into that place, they said. When I asked my wife about it, she didn't deny it. She smiled and said, "I told you I'd be out late that day." I realized then that the warning had replaced the truth, that as long as she prepared me emotionally, the details didn't matter anymore. That night, lying in bed, I understood something I'd been avoiding. She wasn't cheating impulsively. She was transitioning from marriage to something else, and using honesty as a soft landing. And the scariest part wasn't that she might leave. It was how calmly she was practicing living without me while I was still trying to protect what we had. Something shifted after that realization, not dramatically, quietly, like a switch flipping somewhere deep enough that I didn't need to announce it. I stopped filling in gaps for her, stopped assuming good intentions where there were none. When she said she needed space, I didn't reassure her that it was okay. I just nodded. When she explained her plans in advance, I listened without responding. The more neutral I became, the more uneasy she seemed. She asked if I was upset. I said, "I'm paying attention." That unsettled her more than anger ever had. I began focusing on things I'd ignored for years. Finances, schedules, the way decisions were being made without me. I wrote things down, not obsessively, just enough to stay grounded in facts when conversations tried to drift back into feelings and framing. One evening, she mentioned she'd be staying late again and added, "I told you earlier so you wouldn't worry." I replied, "You told me so I wouldn't object." The room went quiet. She said I was twisting her words, that she was trying to be considerate, that I was making things heavier than they needed to be. The familiar script. But this time it didn't hook me. I told her I wasn't interested in being prepped for outcomes I hadn't agreed to, that honesty didn't mean unilateral decisions with advance notice, that a marriage can't survive on disclaimers alone. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't, because I wasn't adapting anymore. I was choosing. And once I did that, the fear I'd been carrying for months finally loosened its grip, not because things were suddenly okay, but because I'd stopped trying to make something broken feel reasonable. After that conversation, the house felt strangely neutral, not cold, not angry, just suspended. She moved through the days like someone waiting for a verdict she assumed was already decided. Polite, careful, almost kind. The same tone she'd used when she was preparing me for things instead of asking me about them. I didn't rush anything. I took a few days to sit with the clarity I finally had. I noticed how calm I felt when I stopped trying to keep up with her explanations. How much lighter my thoughts were when I wasn't rehearsing responses or second-guessing my instincts. I realized I hadn't felt chosen in a long time. So I made my decision the same way everything else had unfolded. Quietly, I separated finances, made arrangements, thought about our child and what stability actually meant going forward, not what looked stable on the surface. When I told her I was done, there was no explosion. I said, "I don't want a relationship where I'm constantly being prepared for disappointment." She looked genuinely shocked, not heartbroken, shocked, like she believed the gradual transition would carry me along until I accepted it as normal. She told me she never meant to hurt me, that she thought honesty made it easier. I told her honesty without choices and kindness. It's control. The weeks after were difficult in practical ways, logistics, conversations, explaining change to a child. But emotionally, something settled. I stopped scanning for patterns, stopped checking the time, stopped wondering what I was missing. What I learned is this. Sometimes betrayal isn't a secret life you discover. It's a new life someone slowly builds while keeping you just comfortable enough not to resist. If you feel like you're constantly being reassured instead of consulted, pay attention. If explanations always arrive before questions, ask yourself why. Walking away didn't feel like losing. It felt like stepping out of a story that had been quietly rewritten without my consent, and choosing to write my own again. If this story resonated with you, Like the video and subscribe for more real Reddit-style stories like this. More stories are coming soon.